Chris, what did you think was the big difference maker in this tough game with the weather conditions being as bad as they were?
Well, I think you hit on it. There's actually quite a few difference makers. The weather conditions, it poured around noon in Mankato and then rained going into the second quarter, I believe. Another big difference maker was the offensive line, their lack of offensive line, should I say, from Minnesota State. They really could not get anything going for Aberg to actually run the ball. But I think the biggest difference maker was Jared DeWitt, the punter for MSU. He pinned them back. He single-handedly forced Northern Michigan into terrible field position throughout the entire game. The only time that Northern Michigan actually had a really good field position was on their touchdown drive late in the fourth quarter when an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty pinned the kickoff back to the 15-yard line for the Mavericks after their touchdown. So it's a lot of those things, but it was definitely Jared DeWitt being able to put them into terrible field position.
It did seem like a game where just everything was sloppy. The weather conditions were sloppy, the offensive play was sloppy, the special teams play was sloppy. It just seemed like everybody wasn't quite ready for this first game of the season. It just looked sluggish to me. Even the Mankato kicker, just Brocious, he was a great kicker in the NSIC last year. Missed two somewhat easy field goals. Yeah, I'll cut him some slack for missing the 36-yarder, but it's almost unacceptable to miss a 22-yard field goal in a close game like this.
And the field conditions were kind of a supplement to that. The 38-yarder was on. That had plenty of distance on it, too. It's just he just pulled that.
Well, we can talk about sluggish play all we want, but I thought the player that really did not show up in this game was Patient. He looked sluggish. He went 3 of 14, 32 yards and an interception. I'm not really so much sure if it had to do so much with injury or the weather conditions or if he just didn't show up. I think it was just a little bit of everything that kind of added up to that. But looking at his play this past week, should Patience start this week, or should Brogan start in his place?
Well, everything that I'm hearing right now is that Patience's sprained ankle may keep him sidelined for this weekend's game, so Brogan might be starting no matter what. If Patient was healthy, I would personally say give the kid another chance, get out there and play a full game. He looked great last year coming in off the bench. He should have looked great this year. The only difference between this Mankato team from 2010 this year to 2009 is the offensive line. And that's the core group that really needs to get together because they are the ones who are going to actually be driving this offense. Not the quarterback, not the running back, not the wide receivers. But coming right back down to the question you asked me, Patient, he should be able to get the ball every single time.
Well, that sort of leads me to my next question. Is this Mankato team capable of winning the NSIC this year? Or are they looking at the possibility of a slightly down season? Because obviously, if we judge this first game of the year, we could do that with every team and almost say, well, yeah, they're going to have a down year. But, obviously this was not a real good indication of MSU's play, or at least what we're going to see during NSIC play. Do you think they will be a team to compete for the championship or not?
For the South Championship, there's a possibility, but it's... From what I saw this past week, it's going to come straight back down to the offensive line, like I said before. If the offensive line shows up, this team's going to be great. This team's going to be right up there with an epic showdown against Duluth later on in the season. But they've got a kind of a tough schedule as well. They're on the road to Augustana, they're on the road to Wayne, they're on the road to Winona State. 3 great teams in the NSIC. I would almost say that they're probably not going to end up with the South Championship this year.
So how do you expect MSU to fare in this upcoming game at Northern State?
Well, this game at Northern State has to be kind of a tune-up game for the rest of the season. Everybody's expecting a win up at Northern State. But it comes right back down to, and I've said it before, is the offensive line. They need to be able to support the running game and support the passing game. What it's really going to come down to is special teams play. If the special teams can get MSU into some good field position off of punt returns and kick returns, And if we have another game this weekend like Jared DeWitt had, where he's pinning the opponents back behind their own 10, it's going to be a win for MSU. The question is, how big is the spread going to be?
The biggest game on Saturday would be St. Cloud State traveling to Augustana for a big conference opener. This game would have fireworks from the get-go, as on the first play from scrimmage, SCSU quarterback Philip Klapke completed a 62-yard bomb to Fred Williams, setting up a Brandon Geese 2-yard touchdown run to make it a 7-0 Huskies lead not 3 minutes into the game. The Vikings would eventually answer in the second quarter. Quarterback Josh Hansen would complete a 32-yard touchdown pass to Tyler Schulte to make it a 7-7 game with 10:39 to go in the half. With 45 seconds to go, Augie would take their first lead. Hansen launched a bomb to Schulte again for an 87-yard touchdown, taking a 14-7 lead into halftime. Early in the second half, Williams for the Huskies would strike again, catching a 45-yard pass that would set up a Geis 1-yard touchdown run to make it a 14-13 lead as the extra point was blocked. When the fourth quarter came around, the game became crazy. With 14-13 to go, Huskies kicker Tyler Aldridge connected on a 37-yard field goal to give St. Cloud a 16-14 lead. SCSU expanded onto that lead as Klapke to Williams connection continued with a 60-yard touchdown bomb to make it 23-14 with 9:43 to go. With 7:41 to go, Augustana kicker Drew Behrens nailed a 38-yard field goal to make it a one-possession game at 23-17. That was when things took a turn for the worse for the Huskies. A bad snap on the St. Cloud punt gave the ball to Augustana on the Huskies' 2-yard line. 2 plays later, Joe Clark added a 1-yard touchdown run to give the Vikings a 24-23 lead with 5:22 left. With 2:25 to go, the game got away from the Huskies. Klapke made his biggest mistake, tossing an interception to Dan O'Keefe as he returned it to the SCSU 2-yard line. Clark took advantage with a 2-yard touchdown run to make it 30-23. A bobbled extra point attempt almost came back to haunt the Vikings, but it was picked up and ran in for a 2-point conversion to make it a 32-23 game, and Augustana went on to win by that score. In a losing effort for the Huskies, Klapke was 24 of 38 with 319 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He was also the Huskies' leading rusher with 17 carries for 41 yards. Williams had the biggest game of all, catching 12 passes for 236 yards and a touchdown. For the Vikings, Hansen was not only 9 of 19 for the game, but his completions were big, throwing for 256 yards. Schulte was barely outstaged by Williams as he still caught 6 passes for 196 yards and 2 TDs. Clark led the rushing attack with 22 carries for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Chris, looking at this game, did St. Cloud State choke this game away, or was this a terrific comeback by the Vikings?
This is a perfect example of an epic choke by St. Cloud State. You have arguably one of the top 3 teams in the NSIC South on the ropes at their home, and you're about ready to go home with a victory. And late in the fourth quarter, you not only fumble a snap on a punt and put it down the 2-yard line, you also throw an interception, and that gets run back to the 2-yard line. Augie was able to take care of those turnovers and turn that into a victory that should have never been. It just goes to prove that sometimes the better teams will get the better of you.
Alright, yeah, I agree with you completely on this. St. Cloud completely choked this game away. It's not like Augie made 2 80-yard drives with 2 touchdowns to kind of, put this game away. This was a situation where your special teams made a huge mistake, and then your starting quarterback, granted, he played very well for a freshman. It was still a huge mistake and a huge spot to make. I agree. It was a complete epic choke on St. Cloud State's part. But looking at St. Cloud State and how efficient their offense was, and with how well Klapke passed the ball, Fred Williams was just incredible. Just some sick numbers. 12 catches for 236 yards. A touchdown to go with that. Do you think he's the best wide receiver in the NSIC this year?
Well, he definitely ranks right up there. However, one of the wide receivers that really caught my eye was just on the other side that was wearing a different uniform in the same game. Tyler Schulte for Augustana had 6 catches for 196 yards with 2 touchdowns. Longest of those was an 87-yard completion. Those two would definitely be in the runnings for bragging rights and being the best wide receiver in the NSIC. That's for sure.
Yeah, I gotta completely agree with you. I thought Schulte played an outstanding game considering that Augie is not really much of a passing team. You look at the stats in this game, yeah, he only had 6 catches compared to 12 for Williams, but only had 40 less yards, had 1 more touchdown, and more importantly, Hansen only threw the ball 19 times. If you look at Klapke, he threw it 38. So he had half the opportunities that Williams had and still almost put up similar numbers. So I agree with you. I think Schulte is going to be up there. I think Williams is going to be up there. I think there are a lot of good wide receivers in the NSIC this year, and I think we just won't know until we get at least halfway through the season who the elite wide receivers are. All right, Chris, so what are your early thoughts about Augie and St. Cloud? How do you think they'll fare in the NSIC?
Augustana's in the very tough South Division. It'll come down to what they do in games against Wayne State College, Minnesota State University, and Winona State. You can make an argument that those are the top 4 teams, and you've got to win on the road in this conference. For St. Cloud, up there in the North Division, which can be argued that it's fairly weak, you could say that they're definitely a top 3 team up in the North.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that aspect. Augie, they're going to have a battle in the South Division this year. Like you said, Mankato, Wayne, and Winona are all gonna be with Augie in that top 4. They're all going to be battling for that number 1 South spot. In the North, I think, it's not as deep, but the teams toward the top are pretty solid. UM-Duluth, I think they're going to run away with the North. Bemidji State is going to finish up there, and of course St. Cloud State is going to be there as well. So I think St. Cloud State and Augie both might be arguably top 6 teams in the NSIC, but it's going to be sort of hard to argue at this point since Augie is going to be stuck in a South Division. They're going to have much tougher battles than St. Cloud State.